Welcome from Provincetown.
Yeah, nice.
Oh, nice. Hi, Lois.
Hey.
We'll wait just one more moment. We have a few more people that are hopping on here. And I think we're on Facebook Live. Marianne, you're keeping an eye on that too. Okay, well, welcome everyone. I think we'll get started. And first of all, thank you for joining us today. It still seems so very strange in a way to have a Kanyos Books event and not actually be in Kanyos Books. Marianne, of course, is, I am not, and our two celebrities of the evening are not, sitting down, sipping that Prosecco with us, which we wish they were, Ann Goldstein and Mary Norris, who will be engaging in a discussion about the lying life of adults. And spoiler alert, it's not about any presidents that we may or may not want to even think of.
Good.
So I want to let everybody know that we here at Kanyos are celebrating our 40th anniversary starting October 1st. Very auspicious for us. And so on our webpage, we have a call for people to share either a short video story or a short written story about anything about the store, a favorite encounter at the store, a favorite author maybe they've seen at the store. It's your choice. So please go to our website. I'll drop it in the chat in a little bit and see what the directions are and send us something that you would like us to share through the course of the year about our 40th anniversary. As many of you, as some of you might recall, the last time Ann and Mary were together at the bookstore, it was for actually a fundraiser for Kanyos Cultural Cafe, which is our not-for-profit. During the pandemic, all not-for-profits have really been seriously impacted by the inability to have the traditional fundraisers that we've had. So again, I'm going to drop in the chat the link to our donation page for our not-for-profit. We hope if you enjoyed tonight's experience that you'll be generous and give a contribution to Kanyos Cultural Cafe to allow us to continue to actually be in the store on Main Street in Sag Harbor and also offer these events on Zoom. And then hopefully before too long, actually in the store itself. So just two other announcements about upcoming Zoom events. We have on Thursday, September 17, a terrific combination of poets joining us from Turtle Point Press. Diane Glancy, who is Native American, and Spencer Reese, who I believe is an Episcopal priest. And they'll be in discussion about Diane's most recent book, The Island of the Innocents, which is a consideration of the book of Job. So that's going to be Thursday, September 17th at 7 p.m. The registration link for the event is on our website. And then the next event to round out the month is on Wednesday, September 30th at 7 p.m. We're part of a group called Racial Justice East End. And the group has a film series called Confronting Racism. We will be screening the film Cracking the Codes, which looks at systemic racism, how we can disentangle internal beliefs, attitudes, and prejudgments about that. So that's going to be at 7 o'clock on Wednesday the 30th. Again, that's on our website. You can register there. So I think that covers most of the events, except I'll say that if you don't have the book already, order it by calling Marianne at the store, or I'm going to drop in the chat our online ordering capability, which is new in the pandemic, so you can get it online if you would like. And while I drop all that in there, I'm going to just turn it over to Marianne to introduce our two special guests. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. And we're so honored. We've been long awaiting the release of the new Ferrante novel. Some of you may know it was originally scheduled to come out in June, and because of circumstances, it came out now. It came out in September, and we're just so thrilled. We're so grateful to Mary Norris for bringing us into connection with Ann Goldstein. both Mary Norris and Ann Goldstein have appeared at Cameos previously, and so I'm very honored that they're joining us again this afternoon. Many of you will be familiar with Mary Norris's first book, Between You and Me, Confessions of a Comma Queen. And the second book we have here, Greek to Me, Adventures of a Comma Queen, of the Comma Queen, excuse me. Both bestsellers, both smart and funny and interesting and informative looks at the details of writing and editing and Mary's work at the New Yorker, where Mary and Ann formed their friendship. Greek to Me is just a brilliant and amazing trip to all things Greek. The language, the food, the place, the circumstances. And I think in terms of our subject tonight, this art and craft of translating and living in other languages is at least one thing that Mary Norris and Ann Goldstein have in common. Certainly a facility with languages. So the book of discussion tonight, Ferrante's Lying Life of Adults, is yet another in the many works that Ann Goldstein has translated. Many of you know that Ann Goldstein has translated all of Elena Ferrante's works. But as if that weren't enough for one lifetime, Ann has also translated the complete works of Primo Levi. She has translated Elsa Marante's work, Alessandro Barico, the poet Giacomo Leopardi, Pier Pasolini, and other notable Italian authors. We could have a whole semester's worth of reading material and discussion just based on Ann's translation list. She has been awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship, and her work has been nominated for an International Booker Prize. And then most recently, she is a recipient of the PEN Renato Poggioli Translation Award. What tremendous accomplishments for both of our guests tonight. And we're delighted to welcome both of you. We'll have conversation between Ann and Mary, and then we'll have time later in the evening for questions from the audience. So again, as Catherine mentioned, if you have some questions you would like addressed, please put them in the chat, and we'll do our best to navigate through there. So we welcome all of you, and a special thanks and welcome now to Ann Goldstein and Mary Norris. A Zoom applause of welcome to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Catherine. I'm going to leap into this, and I know that many people probably already know, but if you don't, you want to know. And you, I think you've told this story before, but you should tell everyone how you came to translate Elena Ferrante.
Yes, well, welcome everybody. Thank you. How it happened was the Italian publisher Edizione AO, after 2001, which is kind of appropriate today, I guess, decided that they wanted to publish internationally and that they would start publishing books in English, that they would open an American branch. And they had published Ferrante in Italy, and they decided to publish The Days of Abandonment would be their first book in English. And so they looked around for a translator. They asked about 5 or 6 different translators. I mean, sort of randomly, they got my name, I think, from the PEN website. And we all translated, I don't know, the first 5 pages or something. And this was a contest that I won, which was a good thing for me, because I really wanted to translate that book.
And you were under pressure to do it fast, as I recall.
Yeah, I did do it pretty fast, actually. Yeah.
And sometimes when we were both working at the New Yorker, when Ann would go to Italy to immerse herself in all things Italian, it would of course be beneficial for translating. I would be left in charge of the department, which was horrible because I would find out all the things Anne did that she didn't even tell people she did because people would come to me to do them. So at this point, for a month, I was doing the New Yorker job, and you were in Ravello?
I was in Ravello. That was really my first translation vacation, so to speak. Well, maybe not my first, but it was January, and I wanted to go someplace where I could work, and I went to the Amalfi Coast, to Ravello. I stayed in the only hotel that was open in the whole town, which was luckily was, you know, it was a European style, so I got breakfast and dinner, because otherwise there was no one else in the whole town. I think once or twice some other people stayed in that hotel. It was very cold. You couldn't really go walking because I couldn't go walking in the woods because there were hunters, but it was amazing. It was really beautiful. I would walk down to the Ravello's up high, and then you could walk down through the lemon groves down to the water, and it was actually that was my experience of my first Elena Ferrante experience, I would say, and I didn't give a thought to Mary offering in my place.
Well, which is perfectly appropriate. What was your schedule of translating like? I mean, what was your work schedule like in Ravello?
In Ravello, I think all I did was translate. My most vivid memory is, as I said, it was very cold, and the hotel really wasn't very heated. So my most vivid memory is sort of making a tent under the blankets with me and my computer typing away. I think most of it. I mean, I would go for a walk in the morning and a walk in the evening, or in the afternoon, I guess, because it got dark. But it was very beautiful. And
I remember once I tried to imitate you by giving myself a fellowship and going to Cinque Terre for a writing vacation. But I know you work in the morning and then go out and walk or take a break. I would go right out in the morning, stay out all day until after lunch, and then I'd come in and try to write something. So it didn't work very well for me. I knew I was getting it backwards. I think we should talk too a little about the Italian class that really is where our friendship dates from at the New Yorker.
Yeah, well, I think that I since college, and really before, I had always wanted to read. I had always wanted to sort of have this almost unconscious desire to learn Italian. But when I was in college, I read Dante, and I wanted to, in a parallel text edition, I really wanted to read Dante in Italian, which coincided with a trip of Mary's to Rome, right?
Yeah.
And then
right. I was traveling. It was my second trip to Greece, and I always like to tuck in a vacation within a vacation. So on the way home, I stopped in Rome for 5 days. And when I came back, I was telling Anne how beautiful Rome was and how easy Italian was, because all you had to know was vino bianco or vino rosso, basically. And everyone was so kind there. Everyone encouraged you to try little bits of Italian, but they also spoke a lot of English. So it seems, you said at that time you always wanted to learn Italian. Yeah. And I had been hanging around at Columbia University with classicists who included the Lorch family. Maristella Lorch was the Dante scholar, I think, at Barnard, wasn't she?
I think so, yeah.
And her daughter Lavinia had been in a Greek play with me, and Lavinia Lorch was our first teacher, but she passed us along to her younger sister, Donatella.
Yeah, so we studied with Donatella for a year, I think, and then Lavinia came back, and we read Dante. We read the Divine Comedy in our Italian.
Canto a week for like 3 years, right?
No. Yes, it was quite ambitious, but we did it, I think. But the Italian class is ongoing.
We read Dante again during our isolation on Zoom.
Yeah. It wasn't the same as reading it in person, I think.
No, we have a teacher who is our teacher's name is Alessio Bordoni. He's about our 5th teacher by my count. Yeah. And he was educated in Italy, and he gave us a Dante course such as they give to Italians, I think, in Italy, so that we read maybe 4 or 5 cantos of the Inferno, a few in Purgatorio and then went right to Paradiso. So it was very compressed.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to get too carried away. Now we want to get more to talking about, well, we could talk a little about translation in general because, and you have brought a lot of attention to the work of the translator because of Elena Ferrante's being pseudonymous and never appearing to promote her own work. So how's that? What does that feel like?
Well, the first time it happened, I was quite, I was surprised. I mean, it surprised me that anybody would be interested in a person who's not the author, I guess I should say. But then I realized that it was a real opportunity to bring attention to the translator, to the fact that, I mean, for example, a reviewer will quote long passages from a book, from a translated book, and never mention that actually the words that he or she is quoting were written by the translator. So it's, but I mean, that's just an example. But I thought it was a great chance to let people know that between you and the book you're reading, there's this other person, the translator, who often, as Mary said, is often neglected or left out. I mean, I think that's beginning to change as there are, for example, there are translation programs now. There are, you can get a degree in translation. It's not just a kind of a side issue or a non-issue. So it's, yeah, I think it's changed. And I think that I've been lucky to have an opportunity to sort of highlight this, this other person that's between you and the book.
Yes, I notice now myself, because of knowing you, whenever I read a review or a listing of a book from a foreign language, I always look at the translator's name. We had a formula at the New Yorker for anything, for a piece of fiction that was, say, translated from French or Japanese or Italian, translated, comma, from the Italian, comma, by Ann Goldstein. And some people didn't like our commas in that little formula.
That's right.
But it was William Shawn's idea that it could be ambiguous, right?
Yes, yeah. They were very logical.
Right, it could have been from the Italian by Ann Goldstein. We needed to keep that out of it. But other publications have different formulas for that.
For the translator?
For the translators, for acknowledging the translator.
Well, I think most places will say that will give the name of the translator. Lots of places don't. They often don't give the language that the book is translated from, so you have to figure that out. And most place publications don't really discuss the translation itself. You know, I mean, it's
right. How does that feel? If you read a review and your name and there's no reference at all to the translator, does that make you mad?
No, it makes me nervous because I think, oh, they hated the translation. They're not going to mention it. On the other
hand, it could mean that the translation was so seamless that they didn't even register that it was a translation.
Right. Well, then that's a different kind of a problem. I mean, you should know that the book was not written in English. I think that's another discussion. You know, how aware should the reader be that the book is not written in English, or that the book is coming from another culture, from another language, really.
Yeah. You know, there's in case we run, you know, we have so much to talk about. If people haven't seen it, there's a wonderful interview with Ferrante in The Guardian, right? Where she took questions from,
from all different
people all over the world.
Yeah. From people who
I didn't see it. So it's a wonderful interview. You can find it on the site for Europa Editions. I think The Guardian Europa Editions. Yeah. And I was interested that I didn't see the name of a translator credited there.
Oh, really? Well,
that you, Anne?
That was me.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yes.
There.
Well, it was interesting because the people who asked the questions were people who were involved with her. They were other translators. They were publishers. They were all people who had been involved with her books. It wasn't sort of professional reviewers or people like that, or writers. It was just people who were involved with her in other ways.
Oh, because I saw there were a lot of booksellers and a lot of translators.
Yeah, I had a question.
That really surprised me. So did you translate yourself then? No, I thought your question was wonderful because you asked her, how do you work? Do you make a lot of corrections, and of what type? And I would like to ask you that same question. How do you work?
Well, I usually start with, sometimes I read the book first and sometimes I don't. I just had a Zoom conversation with another translator, Jenny McPhee, and she said she makes a point of not reading the book first because she feels that the experience of reading as you translate or translating as you read it makes it much more immediate. And I agree. I mean, when I haven't read the book first, there is something very sort of exciting and immediate about just reading and you don't know what's going to happen, but you have to take the time to type all those words while you're waiting to find out what's going to happen.
Extra suspense.
There's extra suspense. Well, sometimes you have to read ahead. It's just impossible not to. But anyway, I make a very rough,
Really?
rough draft. What? Really what?
Do you look up words while you're reading it for the first time?
I do look up words. I look up all the words. I don't spend a lot of time figuring out, like if a sentence is difficult, I don't spend a lot of time figuring out the difficulties. It's a really rough draft. It's a really messy draft. I put it, if I have, if there's a word that I already can see, there's a lot of meanings that it might have. I've sometimes put in all those meanings. I put in a lot of rough kind of things. So the first draft is really kind of a mess, an embarrassing mess, you might say.
But nobody else sees it, right?
No, that's right.
And so when you go back to it to revise, what kind of things do you find yourself doing? Is it mostly vocabulary? Is it syntax?
It's really everything. And in the second draft, which I mean, the first draft is typed, it's on the computer. The second draft also on the computer. I try to smooth things out a little bit. I mean, I try to solve all the bigger problems. I look up things more carefully. I use a lot of different dictionaries. I use several Italian English dictionaries, which interestingly enough, little footnote, are almost all British. So you have to, that's like another little bit of translation that you have to do into American, or that I have to do into American. I use Italian dictionaries, synonym dictionaries, everything. I mean, the internet is amazing. In the time that I've started translating, the amount of information on the internet has grown unbelievably.
Yeah.
And the kinds of things you can look up. I mean, you can look up places, you can look up, you can get very distracted looking things up that aren't necessarily urgent to the translation, but it's all helpful, I think. Anyway, the second draft.
I was going to ask, do you do research on the period that the book is set or anything?
No, I don't really. I mean, I don't do sort of broad research, but if there's, let's say in the Neapolitan novels, there's a lot of Italian history, which I was sort of familiar with broadly, but I had to, there's, if there was the name, sometimes there's the name, let's say the name of a politician or the name of, I think there were some of the events, the bombings, the Red Brigades, all those kinds of events are in the Neapolitan novels. I mean, they're not there in great detail, but in order to even make to get the references right, I would have to, do some research on things like that. I mean, just to know the details so that I could put in the lesser detail and have it be correct.
Did you, in the current book, The Lying Life of Adults, there's so much topography of Naples.
Yes, there is.
Did you look at maps of Naples?
I did. I looked at maps of Naples. I had been to Naples. Well, I'd been to Naples in the late 80s and early 90s. And before I translated the Neapolitan novels, I didn't go back to Naples again. So I had an idea of Naples, but not, you know, it wasn't that detailed. But since then, I've been to Naples a couple of times, so I had a better idea of Naples, and I did have a pretty good idea of a lot of the places in the new novel. But yes, I did spend a lot of time on maps, because she talks about, I mean, in the very beginning, she talks about going from her house in, I don't think I'm giving anything away, from her house in this middle class neighborhood, which is on the hill, the Vomero, down into the working class neighborhoods. And she traces the route. She gives you the names of the streets. So yes, I did do a lot of, a certain amount of work on maps. As I was introduced to this idea, Google Street View, amazing.
So you could see where the piazza was and everything. That
right, I could see. Yeah, I could see some things. In the Neapolitan novels, it's not specific. I mean, people have now identified the neighborhood, but it doesn't at all look like it did in those days. So in the days of in the 50s and 60s, 40s, 50s and 60s. So there was really sort of no way of looking at that, but, well, some photographs, but anyway, in the new book, it was possible to see the map. I mean, to see on the street view, even though Ferrante doesn't really talk that much about place. I mean, she doesn't have that many physical descriptions of places and houses and things like that.
I wonder if the names of the neighborhoods are enough to tell, you know, an Italian what that place is like.
I think for a Neapolitan, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the things that I when we first spoke at Canio's in person that time, I described your work as a copy editor as similar, as one of the things that made you a good translator, because you were used to being like a sieve for the author. And I since have recanted that. I mean, yes, some of the virtues of being a copy editor are good for being a translator, but there's much more to it than that. I understand that translating is a much more creative act than copy editing is. But I was wondering, as a copy editor, how you feel about those run-on sentences in Ferrante. Were you tempted to make some of those commas into semicolons or split up the sentences?
Certainly did. I certainly was tempted. And I confess that I think I did make some of them into semicolons and perhaps even into colons or periods. But I mean, I think that as the Neapolitan quartet went on, I became more and more tempted to make them into semicolons. I got a little more tired of them. Not tired of them, but you know, they're hard to read. I mean, they're hard to read in English. And I wanted to keep, I mean, I think she's doing something, you know, pretty deliberate. She wants the sentence, she wants to get all this information into a sentence, and she wants to end up in a particular place. And I think that in order to preserve that sense of flow and what would you call it, impetus, you sort of need to not to be stopped by semicolons. So when I felt that it was, I mean, I tried to keep the run-on sentences that I thought were important or that would work. I mean, readers may find that there are too many of them, you know, that there are other ones that could have been made a little more normal in English. But,
well, I find that it's, do you want to queue up a short reading? This would be on page, I think it's 81. When this doesn't give anything away, but the narrator is a teenager, and she meets a family with other children, and this is her first encounter with them, and she describes them. Can you read there, Anne, from?
She was slender, Juliana.
Yes, just a few sentences.
Juliana was slender, very beautiful, dark, wearing a lot of eye makeup. Wearing a lot of eye makeup. Her mother must have looked like that as a young woman. Tonino, too, the oldest, was handsome. He had an air of strength, but seemed very shy. He turned red just shaking my hand and barely spoke a word to me. So I don't know if you can really hear the commas, but there are.
Those were just 2 sentences
Yeah.
in prose, but you read them very well so that it's obvious where they break off. But in reading this in that breathless way, I thought I got the point that the author was just trying to get something done, was trying to get these quick descriptions over with and match them up with their parents and make the point so that she could get on to the action. So that was why these were like confined to one sentence. That
No, that's true. Yeah, that's also true.
But the word, I thought it was original with me to describe this style as propulsive, but apparently not. Other people have used that word too. It just goes forward so fast.
Yeah.
So it even gave me the impression that Ferrante writes fast. But from her answer to you in this interview, she struggles like most of us.
Yeah, I think she does. I mean, she in other interviews, she said that that she only publishes, for example, when she's really ready to publish. She feels no need to publish. So she can write as slowly as she wants, or as she feels is necessary in order to get the final version that she wants.
And her translator does not have that luxury.
That's true.
What form does Europa give you? Do they wait until she's published in Italian to give it to you, or do you work with the Italian galleys, or what?
No, usually they give me the final Italian galleys right before the book is published, because she does make a lot of changes at the last minute, and I didn't want to start this and then find that I had to compare the translation to the published book in order to make sure there weren't some changes that I didn't know about.
How do they work at Europa to copy edit something without interfering with the translation?
Well, naturally, my books don't need to be copy edited, but
very good.
because I'm a pretty good self-copy editor, actually, and I allow myself to take some liberties.
And do they check the Italian?
Yes, but Europa does have this system where they always have a person who knows both languages. I mean, they publish a lot of translations, and they have someone who knows both languages, who's sort of the editor and copy editor of all their translations. And it's really helpful. I mean, there are some arguments to be made that you want an editor who doesn't know the language, who is more likely to find places that are rough or places that don't seem to work. But I can also say that having an editor who knows the language and can find places where you made a mistake, I'm very paranoid about mistakes. But
yeah. It would be embarrassing. I read something, I read something in German once that had a word I didn't bother to look up. And it turned out it meant hunchback, and that made a big difference. If I had known that from the beginning, I would have had a completely different idea of what the book was about.
Yeah. I mean, in a 400-page book, let's say, it's unlikely that you're not going to make a mistake. Or I think I once, even in one of the Neapolitan novels, I think I left out like half a sentence, and the person who noticed it was the author. So, but
so he reads the translations?
I don't know that. I don't.
Elena read your translation?
No, she read the first. I think she read the first few, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she reads them all.
So I think we should probably. I bet people have questions, and I have the luxury of being able to ask you more questions anytime I want. But maybe we should. Is this a good time to see if there are some questions in the comments?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Ann. Maybe just as a segue right now, a number of people, Ann, are curious about your relationship and how you interact. I know you've spoken about this before, but how do you communicate, if at all, with Elena Ferrante? And just a word or two about how that works. Some folks are asking what is it like to translate an author whom you've never met? And I know that you're communication is restricted in a certain way. So if you could just speak a little bit about your relationship with her.
Yeah, well, I don't really have a relationship with her. In the beginning, she was actually much more reclusive than she is now. I mean, not that she's public, but she gives a lot of interviews, and she's quite generous with her interviews, really. But in the beginning, she wasn't, and I communicated with her. When I had questions, I would write to the editors, who, as far as I know, are the only people who know for sure who she is, the editors of Edizione AO and of Europa Editions, and they would write to her, and then she would write to them, and then they would write back to me. So it was kind of a three-way system, and I became comfortable with that. I sort of liked that. I think probably at a certain point it's possible that I could have emailed with her directly, but I don't know, it seemed to me easier to do it this way. And it's also true that I've translated a lot of dead writers. So I was kind of used to the absent writer. So yeah, so we sort of kept it that way.
So would you say you find it more freeing that way, in a sense that you're left to your own creation, in a sense?
I don't know I suppose it is. I mean, I don't think about it in those terms. I don't think about whether, I don't think in terms of, well, I don't have to worry about what the author thinks. I certainly don't. I mean, because, you know, the author could still probably read, I mean, she may read the translations and she may have comments. I don't know. She doesn't ever say anything, but she might. I don't really see it as freeing. I don't know. Translation is a very freeing job. Well, maybe it is in some ways.
She has said that she fully trusts you and your work. So
yeah, well, that's freeing. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, and just on the detail of language, a number of people are curious about the dialect, the Neapolitan dialect that is sometimes referred to in the text. And if you could speak about what you see in the original Italian, and any thoughts on replicating some of the rhythms or the diction of a dialect.
Well, she doesn't, Ferrante, as many of you probably know, she doesn't actually write in dialect. Or she sometimes has a word or a phrase, maybe a phrase in dialect, but there's not a lot of dialect in her books. When she says so-and-so said in dialect, she writes in Italian. You know, people have speculated on the reason for that. I mean, first of all, that many Italians wouldn't understand the dialect. Another is that the dialect is very much, I mean, there is a Neapolitan literature, but it's also very much a spoken language, and it wouldn't have the same effect on the page. As for translating dialect, there is no good way that I know of to translate dialect. I think the only way is to be, in the phrases that she does use, is to use sort of more slangy words or more colloquial expressions. Right. I think it doesn't work to try to make something, use something equivalent. People have tried that, like using, I mean, English doesn't really have dialects in the same way that Italian does. I mean, it has accents, it has strong accents, let's say, and maybe British English has accents that are more like dialects, perhaps. But it just ends up sounding artificial, I think.
Right.
Something like that.
I have to say, your I don't know if this was your choice or your construction of the phrase when Giovanna overhears her father talking about Giovanna and how she's becoming like her aunt. You say she is getting the face of Vittoria. Mm-hmm. And that phrase just really jumped off the page at me, getting the face of. And I wondered about how you came to that. Were there other choices that you had in mind? Because it rings in such a powerful way later.
Well, it's pretty literal.
Okay.
That's the expression. And I thought about it a lot. I mean, I thought about, is this an expression that's normal? Is it not? Does it sound strange in Italian? Is there an English idiom, you know, getting to look like or something like that? Well, first of all, that's not as, it's not as powerful as you say. It is powerful. And in the end, I went back to the pretty literal translation, because I thought that was, that it conveys what the father is saying in a stronger way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Use even some, I don't know, some other English expression.
In general, you like a literal translation, right? And
I do.
not a very free translation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really I'm not very free. As I said, I'm not very free.
I would like to ask you about a few of the other translations that you've done by comparison. And maybe just to start, in particular, there was an article some time back, who can remember, about a number of younger writers coming up now who the author suggested were influenced by the work of Elena Ferrante. And I happen to have one here. A Girl Returned. I really like this book, and it's your translation. The author is Donatella di Pietro Antonio. This is one example of several works mentioned, but do you see Ferrante's influence coming through in this book in particular, or others?
I mean, I think I don't really have a good enough grasp of the whole Italian literary scene. There's another book. I don't have it here in my show and tell area, but that's just coming out, just translated by me, which also has. I mean, I think that the writing about women's experience. I think that maybe some younger Italian women writers have felt freer to write about the experience of women and the experience of young women as well, and older women. And I think that's maybe one of the things that that Ferrante has done. You know, Italian is very formal. It's very Italian. There's this very specific, you know, canon of mostly male writers. You know, and a few years ago, I think. There was all the main Italian literary prize, the Premio Strega, had been won by men for years. I mean, you know, and then, you know, they sort of said, whoops, maybe we better give it to a woman. But there were, you know, not that there weren't really good books by women, but it's just, you know, there's a kind of rigidity, I guess, in the Italian outlook.
Didn't it happen a little bit backwards from what you suggested too, Marianne, that the writing of Elena Ferrante brought back some books by writers she admired?
Yes, that's also true.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Was it Elsa Morante mostly?
Elsa Morante, Anna Maria Ortese.
Right.
Yes, there. Very good.
It helps to be in the bookshop.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it might be like to attempt to translate Primo Levi. Just switching completely, you know, subject matter, gender, etc., perhaps style as well. Could you tell us a few words about your experience with Primo Levi's work?
Yeah, I'm just going to also correct something there. I was the editor of the complete works in English, which was I didn't translate all the books, although, you know, you never know. I translated 3 of them, but it was really the brainchild of an editor at Norton, at now Liverite, Bob Weil, to make the complete works of Primo Levi available in English in a single edition, the way they were available in Italian. And so he brought me along as the editor. I mean, I had read some Primo Levi. I didn't really know that much about him. And it turned out that his books had been very badly published in English, in the sense that some of them had been published as they were in Italian, some of them had been published in bits and pieces. So it was a little bit of a mess. And in the end, we decided to retranslate everything, except for the first book, which was originally called in English Survival in Auschwitz, but which is actually called If This Is a Man.
Mm-hmm.
but that was also, we were able to revise that. So that was a huge project that went on for about really more than a decade, I think.
Wow.
Because there were 8 translators, I think 8 translators or 9 translators. The books it was complicated. It all had to be edited. It had to be, we did some critical apparatus. And so it was really an amazing project. However, that isn't really what you asked me about the writing. I mean, Primo Levi is an amazing writer. You could say, I think that I saw myself quote, sometimes I don't remember what I said in an interview, but it turned out that I said that Elena Ferrante and Primo Levi were not so far apart in the sense that they were both very good writers, really good writers in completely different ways. I mean, Levi's sentences are also very long, but they're very complexly structured in a way that Ferrante's are not. I mean, hers are, as Mary said, propulsive, getting from one place to another. Levi conveys a huge amount of information, but in a very kind of balanced and structured and beautiful way. But I think it's always good to have a lot of different styles in your head. So anyway, I'm not gonna.
You ever get stuck in one? I remember when I was reading Frank McCourt's Angela's Ashes. After I finished that book for 2 weeks, my inner voice had an Irish brogue. And I wonder if you're so immersed in the Ferrante novels when you're translating them. Do you get a track in your head of her voice?
I do. I mean, I get those sentences. I get some run-on sentences in my head sometimes.
I can imagine.
I get the character. I get the character speaking a lot.
Fascinating. Couple other questions on translation. Someone's asking about your experience translating Jhumpa Lahiri's work, and then also are your English translations of Ferrante used to bring Ferrante into other languages? If you're aware of that.
I don't really know the answer. I think maybe, but I'm not really sure. I don't know the answer to. As for Jhumpa Lahiri, well, that was an interesting experience because, after all, I could not write like Jhumpa Lahiri in English. I mean, I couldn't translate her Italian into her English. I had to translate it into my English, which was very nerve-wracking, as you can imagine. We got along fine, and in the end, she made a lot of different word choices in the end. She changed a lot of the words. I mean, the vocabulary, not the structure of the sentences, but the sentences weren't complicated. It was about her learning Italian. So it wasn't a complicated book syntactically in a way, but it was interesting. It was an interesting experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So some of us are reading this current novel very rapidly because we've been anticipating it for so long and enjoying it, and then suddenly coming to the realization that once we finish this book, we wonder what might be next. I had a customer in the shop today that she admitted to, she read the last page and she quickly turned the page, imagining, hoping that there would be more to come. So a number of people are wondering, do you have any idea that you can reveal whether this might be the beginning of another series?
I have no idea. The fact is, it's true. It ends in this kind of ambiguous way where you feel like she's leaving it open. It could continue. It could not continue. But I don't know. I never find out until it's really certain what's going to happen. But I would just say that if you haven't read, a number of people, it turns out, haven't read the earlier novels. So if you haven't read the earlier novels, they're really wonderful. The 3 shorter novels.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Days of Abandonment was the first one I read, and that was what got me hooked on Ferrante. And I kept thinking while I was reading the new book, the Days of Abandonment is about a woman whose husband leaves her and she has 2 kids. And I kept thinking that the daughter of that woman might be a prototype for the narrator of this book.
I know. I thought that's a great idea. It's true.
Mhm.
I mean, the people, the characters in the new book are not all that pleasant, and that daughter is not so pleasant in the days of abandonment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the question of languages, someone's wondering, are there other languages that you speak or translate or feel comfortable in? And I'm also wondering if you like to write a little bit, just your own creative writing. So
No.
that's two different things.
No. The answer to that is no. I'm not doing my own creative writing. I mean, I could write an introductions and things like that. I've done a few things like that, but not nothing else. And I studied. I mean, I think the first language I learned actually was French, and then I learned Latin and Greek also. But those have mostly they aren't too current in my brain right now.
Thank you. So let's see. I'm wondering if we've gotten some new questions here. Someone is asking, we assume Ferrante is a daughter. Do we know whether she's a mother? Do we have any biographical information about Ferrante herself that you want to mention?
It depends if you believe what she says. Yeah, she has daughters.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But we don't know if she's making a biography.
Do you sometimes sense a character that she's created that might be just a slight representation of herself, or do you not get into overlaying that?
I actually don't get into overlaying that. I don't. I mean, I consider that the person writing the novels, I mean, I feel that there's a very strong voice writing these novels that's similar from one novel to I mean, it's not exactly the same because, well, Giovanna's a teenager for one thing in the new book, but there is something about the voice that I think is similar, and that I sort of consider that that's the author, whoever she is, or he, if you want to go that far. But the person is that voice, and that's who I sort of think of as the author.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I have a twisted idea that I would like to contribute here. I love that the mother in the new book is a proofreader, that she's spending time at home with, piles of proofs and reading. I wonder if Ferrante isn't starting to be inspired by you, Anne.
Love that. That's great.
Well, maybe so, but I haven't moved on to, she's a proofreader of romance novels.
That's true.
It could be a subtle homage in some way. Now, I realize, of course, in the time of COVID, travel is restricted. Would there have been, or may there be in the future, appearances that you might be giving in Italy around the book? Did that happen with earlier books? Were you there presenting at all?
The only author I presented in Italy. Oh no, I did once do a presentation of Ferrante with some other people in Naples.
Mm-hmm.
But I probably wouldn't. I mean, I don't know. They have their own presenters or something.
Right. Right.
They don't need me.
But there is an English language bookstore there, right, in Rome?
Yeah, there is. Actually, that's true. I forgot. I did an event there at the English language bookstore, at the new English language bookstore. Yeah, and actually, the event that I did about Ferrante, I did in Naples with at the university in Naples. It was a very big event. It sort of ties back to what I was talking about Ferrante freeing other women writers to write about women's experiences. It was, Ferrante was very dismissed when she first started publishing. And the fact that she could there was like a one-day conference about her work at the university in Naples was huge. It was just a very unusual and it was like breaking down a lot of barriers. So it was really great to be part of that.
So I understand from, a few talks that you've given and with the publisher that, no one had an absolutely clear sense of how phenomenally successful these books might have become. I mean, what does it mean to you, if you could just say, a few words, and maybe we'll be concluding shortly if folks don't have any other last questions. But I mean, how do you describe the tremendous success and appeal of Ferrante around the world, globally?
It's a $1 million question. It's very hard to explain why she's so successful. But I mean, there's some things that are, I could say, I guess, that, her characters are so, to say something is universal sounds like they're generic. They're not generic. They're very particular. But I think, well, take Giovanna, the teenager of the protagonist of the new novel. We've all been teenagers, or we've all grown up in some way and been deluded by or disenchanted by our parents or other adults in our lives, by ourselves. We've had those struggles. And I think her way of presenting these things is is these kind of, things that we all recognize, is very, it's very sharp and kind of harsh sometimes. And I think it allows readers to see these same relationships, let's say, or emotions in maybe a slightly different way. It gives you some insight into life. I know it sounds a little silly, but I don't know. I think there's something about the way she writes that allows us to see ourselves in another way.
Absolutely. Yeah, very well said. There's a fierce kind of penetrating honesty and vulnerability in the work that comes through. And I dare say is a tribute to your subtle skill as a translator. It's the voice of Ferrante, but you're bringing it to us in a way that it's so dynamic on the page that as I'm reading, I'm literally gasping in places that are surprises, or I can't believe she just did that.
Right.
It's absolutely animated and visceral on the page. So it's really quite extraordinary.
Thank you.
Well, we thank you. Maybe we'll bring our evening to a close with great gratitude and pleasure, and to both Mary and Ann for joining us, and all our wonderful viewers and participants around the country and maybe even beyond. We are happy to sell you copies of these wonderful books. Mary Norris is Greek to me, and just one of the many Ferrante novels here, and other translations by Ann Goldstein. So I'll close us out and ask everyone maybe to unmute, and so we can really give you a very loud, hearty applause. Thank you, Mary Norris. Thank you, Ann Goldstein.
Thank you, Marianne and Catherine. And we love Kenny.
Brave. Bravissime.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Listen, I also just want to share my gratitude for Mary and Ann. You all were terrific, riveting, and we kept getting messages throughout the talk that people were really loving what they were hearing. I'd like to thank everybody for joining us. We had almost 100 people on today, which is our record for sure. I've dropped in the chat our online bookstore link. You can go there and get the book if you're not physically near us, to order it from us directly. And also our Canios Cultural Cafe donation page. The link is there for that. I'd like to mention one other program that I neglected to say at the beginning of the program. We have two people in conversation on Saturday the 26th at 5 o'clock. We have civil rights veterans Lewis Steele and Janet Bell. Janet Bell has written Lighting the Fires of Freedom, African-American Women in the Civil Rights Movement. It's a terrific book. And Lewis Steele, a lawyer, wrote The Butler's Child, talks about his coming to grips with his own white privilege as a lawyer in the Civil Rights Movement. So join us on the 26th at 5 o'clock for them, as well as on the 12th for the poets. But again, really, this was phenomenal, gals. You were fantastic as always. It's women that really are make the world go round, and Ferrante included. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Arrivederci.
Arrivederci. Let's have the Prosecco.
Okay.
Let's get the Prosecco.
Here, Richard.
Okay.
Grazie mille.
Hey.